welcoming up Andrew Lichterman, who is a policy analyst and lawyer with the Oakland-based Western States Legal Foundation. As a lawyer, he has represented peace and environmental activists in a variety of settings and also taught at alternative law schools for many years. In recent years, his work has focused on the purposes and impacts of U.S. nuclear and other strategic weapons programs, including their effect on global disarmament affairs and on their relationship between nuclear technologies, militarism, and the global economy. He is a member of the Global Council of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons and serves on the coordinating committee of United for Peace and Justice. And there is a lot more to say about Andy, but unlike our other panelists, he stuck to the request to provide a light bio. Andy, please add anything else that you would like to about yourself, and we're looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Well, I guess what I'll add is that I started out my independent, on the verge of adulthood political life with an underground newspaper in a high school in upstate New York, where I could look out my window and see the water tower of the nuclear weapons facility, the Knowles Atomic Power Lab. And one of the people who I met through this underground paper is here today. So, listening to the other speakers, what I really realized my talk is about is, why do we end up with technologies that are expensive and dangerous, like nuclear power? And why is conversion of the centralized power structures, both military and civilian, so hard? And on the occasions when people talk about climate change and nuclear weapons at the same time, the focus is almost always just on the effects. Burning immense quantities of fossil fuels and nuclear warfare, as many have said, are the two ways that the human species can do enough damage to the ecosystems we all depend on to not only threaten our own species, but the rest of life on Earth. But at the same time, the threats that are posed by global warming and nuclear weapons also have common causes. Each is a predictable product of an economy that's been dependent on endless material growth, powered by rapidly expanding energy supplies, driven for centuries by ruthless competition among authoritarian organizations of ever-increasing size. The roots of the nuclear dilemma run deep. Our technology has been shaped by the central role war-making has played from the early days of Western modernity. No less important has been the race to control and extract the most easily available forms of concentrated energy, fossil fuels. As the historian Charles Tilly wrote, this has been true from the beginning of the development of the kind of nation-states that have come to dominate the planet. He said, power holders' pursuit of war involved them willy-nilly in the extraction of resources for war-making from the populations over which they had control and in the promotion of capital accumulation by those who could help them borrow and buy. War-making, extraction, and capital accumulation interacted to shape European state-making. This connection between the capacity to make wars and the extraction of resources, particularly fossil fuels, remains strong. The US military is the largest institutional consumer of oil in the world, using over 100 million barrels per year, much of it in operations aimed at assuring the continued flow of oil to global markets. As Tilly put it, war makes states, and war-making has played a leading role in the kinds of science and technology that the victors have chosen, the kinds of science and technology that have survived and prospered up to now. The world wars of the 20th century constituted leaps forward in technology and social organization in the most powerful states. The world was profoundly changed by World War II, and the permanent state of war engendered by the interaction of the political changes it wrought and the technologies and institutions it spawned. The bomb is only the leading instance of the direction and magnitude of technological change, and the military-industrial complex only an example of the power and social character of the kind of organizations that have come to dominate the modern world. These organizations extract a privileged wealth stream for their upper echelon inhabitants from the rest of an increasingly globalized economy using particular technologies combinations of technology, ideology, and organizational technique. And in each instance of these large complex of organizations, they operate together in very specific ways. Today, nuclear power and high technology weapons are elements in and also help to sustain a global circulation of trade and investment devoted to the production of goods and services that only a fraction of the world's population can afford to buy. Large organizations, whether public or private, provide services and buy and sell mainly to each other or to consumers who are the upper echelon inhabitants of those same organizations, the technocrats, bureaucrats, managers, and professionals who constitute what we know as the modern middle class. This dynamic pushes much of the world's population towards the margin, with luxury crops, resource extraction, and now biofuels driving hundreds of millions of people off the land and into burgeoning urban slums all over the world. Yet at the same time, development efforts continue to center on centralized energy and transportation infrastructure designed to serve global supply chains for upmarket consumer goods, with urban areas worldwide competing to become stable nodes in this increasingly insular top tier of the global economy. Now, in this kind of world, weapons and military services are going to be a growth industry. High-tech weapons and nuclear technologies provide a very effective strategy for sectors of national elites and of the professional and managerial classes to carve out secure places for themselves in this increasingly stratified economy. They provide privileged access to their own country's resources, capital largely without competition in capital markets, and a development context that can be shielded quite effectively from foreign competition. The tools of nationalism and fear of foreign others, easily amped up with sophisticated propaganda techniques, facilitate the extraction of wealth from the rest of society around them. National security secrecy prevents scrutiny of nuclear enterprises that, whether in first-generation nuclear powers like the United States or post-colonial states, have been rife with technical problems, corruption, and widespread, intractable environmental impacts. In this context, it's important to note the connection between nuclear weapons and nuclear power is a feature, not a bug. Nuclear technology, with its vision of near magical, limitless power, an image its purveyors always have very energetically promoted, casts as well a positive aura over big, centralized, high-tech development programs that are profitable for elites, but have little or even negative value for much of the population in this ever more stratified world. Now, we need to keep this broader background in mind when we're thinking about forming strategies. So again, when people start trying to figure out, when we're bringing our movements together, where do we start? One of the first places people start with the military issues, nuclear weapons, high-tech weapons, and so forth, and climate change, try to forge cooperation among the different parts of our movement, is with conversion, working to convert military facilities for green jobs, the military-industrial complex to green jobs. And let's consider this against the background of this starkly stratified global economy I've sketched out. Perhaps the most consequential fact for the fate of an individual in today's world is whether or not you have a secure place in an organization in this top tier of the global economy. And for large organizations, the minimum requisite for a secure place in that upper tier is a strategy that allows them to minimize competition to the degree of extracting a rent-like return from the rest of society. This now is acknowledged even in the economic mainstream. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz writes that we have a political system that gives inordinate power to those at the top. And they have used that power not only to limit the extent of redistribution, but also to shape the rules of the game in their favor, and to extract from the public what can only be called large gifts. Economists have a name for these activities. They call them rent-seeking. The reigning standard for what constitutes a good investment has become the capacity to extract these kinds of returns. Organizations that have developed strategies which enable them to do this are unlikely to abandon them easily. High-tech armaments industries, including nuclear establishments, are a case in point. Now, there are also practical difficulties in converting many kinds of military research and manufacturing. A little congested here, sorry about that. Military research and, you sit there for a minute. So the practicalities of conversion have actually been fairly well documented and could require a separate discussion. But the most important obstacle, I think, is that the organizations of the military, industrial, and nuclear complexes have these economic strategies that are dependent on particular combinations of technology and ideology and organizational technique. Again, the use of national security fear, secrecy, connections directly to the state, and so forth, that are not easily redirected to other pursuits. They're going to be very reluctant to abandon them and the favorable position they've carved out for themselves in order to compete with other powerful sets of organizations. The arms makers don't want to be competing for capital and customers with wind turbine or solar or rail manufacturers in China or even lower cost emerging manufacturing centers around the world. And it's important to note that this is so not only for investors and top managers in military and nuclear industries, but for professional and managerial workers and skilled production workers who have fairly secure positions as well. Workers in the arms industries, and particularly in aerospace, make significantly more than average American workers. One recent study showed that aerospace workers make about $80,000 a year on average, compared to about a $44,000 average median wage. So those holding secure positions in military industrial complexes are unlikely to see alternatives that provide them with a comparably privileged path forward. Their strategies and their economic power provide them with a very effective means for defending their place in the status quo, particularly in a society like the United States, where money converts pretty seamlessly into political power. So it shouldn't surprise us that organized workers in top-tier enclaves, like the military-industrial complex, side with their employers on matters of economic development policy and also technology choice. So here's language from an International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers leaflet. The IAM has and continues to urge Congress to increase funding for several programs that benefit Lockheed Martin directly and indirectly in the annual defense appropriations bill. Over the years, we have successfully lobbied jointly with Lockheed Martin's legislative representatives to add or restore funding levels for the F-16, F-22, F-35, C-130, and the C-5. Now, how am I doing for time? 3 minutes? All right, I'll skip.
Are these papers going to be available to people now?
Yes.
So much reading is fantastic.
So another thing we really have to keep in mind is that many of our conversion strategies of the past have implicitly been dependent on a world in which governments, many of them, including this government, pursued Keynesian economic policies, where there was a significant possibility of aiding this conversion process with significant funding from the state. All the signs are there that the Keynesian era is over. This is something that many commentators have been writing about recently. And so I could say a lot more about that, but I just want to sort of skip to the end, which is here again, I think what we have to be doing is we don't abandon the conversion discussion because it's hard. But once again, what we do is we focus on causes rather than effects. So, we're not likely to move things much further along by asking high-tech workers whether they wouldn't rather be making solar panels or wind turbines or something like that, chances are that most of them would. The place I think to start the conversation is by asking, why is it you can't choose work that contributes to a more peaceful and ecologically sustainable world without risking your family's economic future? And I think we have to realize that in times of great disparity of wealth and power, the middle positions, the possibilities for incremental gains through normal politics for those in the bottom and middle ranges of society tend to disappear. At the same time, and this is relevant to Ramana's comment that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, the depth and interdependence of these crises we face provides an opportunity for a new and deeper conversation about the kind of social change we need. And I'm going to close with a little remark about this from the labor scholar and activist Sam Gindin, who observed, "The polarization of options under neoliberalism provides potentially fertile organizing ground. More radical ideas now have the potential to take on a relevance that is not just ideological. As the moderate is exposed as being impractical, what does become practical is the radical."